All right, here's my hot take. The best photo mode on your camera is Aperture Priority. I know Aperture Priority is not manual. It's not manual. Every professional photographer out there should be using Aperture Priority. And today, I'm gonna break down why Aperture Priority, and if you combine it with Auto ISO, chef kiss, it is the best secret weapon out there. And I use that for almost all my shoots. All you purists out there who think manual mode is the best, you guys gonna disagree with me, but I'm telling you, this combo, it saves time, it reduces stress, and it keeps your creative control where it actually matters. So let's get into it. What's up everyone, my name is Martin Wong. I'm a professional photographer in Southern California, Los Angeles with over 25 years behind the lens. If you want photography tips that actually helps you get better at photo taking and making shooting easier, hit the subscribe and let's dive into today's topic. Alright, I'm gonna be honest. I know this is a controversial topic because a lot of photographers out there, they say like you have to shoot in manual because it is the only way to control everything. That's true, manual mode does give you a lot of control, but it also means you constantly have to adjust your shutter speed, your aperture, your ISO, and a bunch of other things. And especially when light is moving a lot and changing, your subject's moving, it's a mess. Sometimes you want creative control without all that headache. So this is why Aperture Priority is the best. Okay, so what is Aperture Priority mode? Well, let's see. On your camera, this dial here, it has the letter A, someone might say AV depending on which camera you have. It lets you pick your aperture, which controls the depth of field. And then your camera will automatically choose the shutter speed and the ISO to making sure you get the right exposure. So you decide how blurry or how sharp your picture is, or at least the background, and then the camera will handle everything. The exposure triangle, like it will deal with all of that by itself. So why does that matter? Well, you see, when you choose the aperture, you are choosing the depth of field, which is, I would say, the most creative tool in photography. You want like a creamy, blur out background behind your subject? Well, use a wide aperture. Go for like f1.8 or f2.8, or go for f1.2 if you have one of those lenses. Or if you want everything to be razor sharp from front to back, go for like f11, f16, or even f22, Aperture Priority puts that wonderful control directly in your hand and you don't have to worry about anything else. Now, there's also something that's making it even more special. This is the secret sauce of how I shoot all the time. I always pair Aperture Priority with Auto ISO. So how that works is that I set my aperture for the look that I want, and the camera will automatically adjust the shutter speed and ISO to keep the exposure correct. So let's say in a very changing light environment, doesn't matter if it's indoor, outdoor, both, whatever it is. This means that I can focus on just composition and the timing, and I don't have to worry about the camera setting at all. So let me give you an example of how I use this combo, in all my shoots. Most of the time, like, when I shoot weddings or when I shoot portraits, street travel, landscape, a bunch of other stuff, I would pick the aperture that I want and then turn on Auto ISO with a max ISO limit so I can control how much noise is in the photos. So for example, let's say I'm shooting a wedding indoors, right? I'll choose something like f2.8, good nice blur, but the lights keep changing. Let's say the clouds are coming in or covering the sun or stuff like that. If I have Aperture Priority with Auto ISO, the camera will adjust for me so I don't miss a single moment, which is very important for things like weddings or sports and that kind of stuff. So you can get the perfect shot every single time. Of course, this setup isn't perfect. There's gotta be some reason why there's a manual mode. So like, for example, when I'm shooting with flash, I switch back to full manual because your flash require, your control over your shutter speed, your aperture, your ISO, and your flash power, and your camera doesn't know that. Like, it doesn't know how strong the flash is. So that's when manual mode actually is needed. There's other time that you might need it, like, you do some creative effects like motion blur or like freezing some really fast action. Then you do have to switch back to, manual or even, shutter priority for whatever you need to get that photo that you want. Back to Aperture Priority and Auto ISO. Here are some tips to get the most of this combo. And again, I love this combo. First thing you want to do is that you want to set the maximum ISO limit so can decide how noisy your image is, like how much noise it is. I usually keep mine somewhere between ISO 3200 to 6400, but it really depending on which camera you have. Some higher end camera has better noise control. You also want to watch your shutter speed. So if it gets too slow, or let's say you're hand holding your camera and it's less than 60 of a second, you might get some motion blur, and you don't want that depending on the type of shot that you want. But most likely if you don't, then you might want to increase your ISO or open up your aperture a bit wider. And the last trick to this combo is using exposure compensation. So you can use that to brighten your photos or darken it. You can usually press a button and turn your dial. So it could be a plus or minus, maybe +1, -1. So you can change how your shot look without having to change your aperture. Now, if you practice this shooting, you're gonna get a lot more confidence. You're gonna have more intuition on how it works. So even if you use it as a learning mode, it is amazing. A lot of beginners love Aperture Priority because it teaches them how aperture affects the depth of field, and they don't have to get overwhelmed by all the technical setting, and they don't have to worry about the whole exposure triangle. Professional also love it because it speeds up the workflow and it keeps your creative flowing, You don't have to worry about just changing settings and all kinds of stuff. Plus, it works on almost every modern camera, like from DSLR to mirrorless. Doesn't matter if entry-level camera or pro-level camera, they all have that. So, is Aperture Priority the best camera mode out there? Yes, absolutely. I mean, for me, it is. I'm sure there's some of you that disagree. If you pair it with Auto ISO, it is the best thing I think is out there. But, some of you might think, Martin, you're wrong. But, let me know in the comments. For me, it is the perfect balance of creative control, convenience, and also just ease of mind, Anyway, that's my hot take. But if you found this helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe for more practical photography tips. And drop a comment down below if you're on Team Manual or you're now fully converted to Team Aperture Priority. I would love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, thank you for watching and have a great day. Bye.